You're listening to the Full Court Press with your host, Drew Duncan. Don't you dare touch that dial. Well, I tell you what, the rumors continue to grow in the world of sports. Gossip, it's trendy. We can't get away from it no matter what we do. And right now, there's nothing trendier than Vince Young. Sure, you remember Vince Young, 2006 winner of a BCS national championship game, the Texas Longhorns, led that football team. Point blank, far and away, to me, was the Heisman Trophy winner that year. It is what it is. But just a shade over a decade ago, must feel like eons ago to not only the Longhorns, but Vince Young. Touted as to be one of the most successful quarterbacks coming out of that draft. A draft that was initially thought to be stockpiled. Matt Leinart, Jay Cutler, Vince Young, all three guys going in the top 11. And yet somehow, with Cutler retiring and becoming a broadcaster, Matt Leinart having a abysmal career, and Vince Young having a couple of good seasons, suddenly all three of these men have been thrusted into the category of relevant through gossip. Vince Young has alleged that he is going to, quote, expose Jeff Fisher's ass in what he is calling his tell-all book. You know, when I started to look at this, I wasn't intrigued because it was Vince Young. I wasn't intrigued because it was Jeff Fisher. And I wasn't intrigued because of Matt Leinart and Jay Cutler. I was intrigued because I thought to myself, wait a minute. Just a couple of months ago, we saw an entirely different Vince Young. Entirely different. As you all know, Vince Young was headed to the CFL. He was going to get a contract with the Rough Riders. And everything was dandy. Matter of fact, there was an interview through Sports Illustrated that Vince Young did where specifically he said that anything that happens to me from here on in is my fault. It's on me. And I don't have any problems with Jeff Fisher. We're okay. Fast forward to June 17th. Vince Young tears his hamstring. He gets cut by the Rough Riders. And a few days later, Vince Young is ranting and raving about how Jeff Fisher and the NFL conspired against him and did him wrong. You know, there's two sides to every coin. There's always two tails of the tape. There's always two sides to a story, and usually the truth meets some way halfway in the middle. He did say that he called it a love-hate relationship that he had with Jeff Fisher. To hear Vince Young tell it back in 2008, there was an altercation, a verbal fight, between him and Jeff Fisher. And he says after that, it all just kind of went sour. And he even said, look, if me and Fisher would have been able to get along, we wouldn't have hurt the organization the way that we did. So how did everything suddenly become Jeff Fisher's fault? When before it was we did these things, we have these problems. Now everything was a setup. Now everything is because he had financial problems off the field. Now everything is all about exposing Jeff Fisher. Now everything is all about how Vince Young didn't play himself, that his work ethic was there. He says in the interview with Sports Illustrated, he said specifically, I was always ready. Really? 9 touchdown passes and 17 interceptions in your second year was always ready? He went on to talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick. He said, well, Ryan Fitzpatrick leads the league in interceptions every single year. And granted, I'm not the biggest Fitzy fan. But look, you know, the NFL world is, there are a lot of guys who get trophies and rewards that I don't think that they should. I understand that Vince Young was the AP Rookie of the Year in 2006, okay? I get that. I understand his argument. I know where he's coming from. He feels like, how did I go from Rookie of the Year to this? Mind you, in his offensive Rookie of the Year, he threw 12 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. And I say that because a couple of years ago, when Cam Newton was named the MVP, Ryan Fitzpatrick, in terms of passing yards, only finished a few behind him, threw 31 touchdown passes and 15 interceptions. Essentially, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. Versus Vince Young, the real reality of it is if you watch any of the interviews, when Vince Young was a rookie, there used to be a show. It was called The Best Damn Sports Show, period. And there was an interview on there where he was via webcam and Reggie Bush was there. And he just started running smack to Reggie about beating the Trojans and being the man and this and that and the third. You know, Vince's ego, I think, really probably got the best of him. You know, one of the things that I talked about in yesterday's program was Derek Carr and his humbleness. But yet the way he is in control of everything that's on the field and how I believe that he's got the respect of the guys that are in the locker room. And to me, it was evident through the body language that every player on that football team had when he went down. And when Vince Young got hurt, it just wasn't the same body language. And mind you, while Vince Young was out, the Titans did enjoy a 12-3 season or a 13-3 record overall. Now, granted, they lost their first game in the playoffs, but it wasn't like they were missing Vince Young. I'm not saying that he wasn't a good player. I'm just saying there were a lot of things that he needed to improve. Guys with his similar skill sets, i.e. Tim Tebow, aren't in the NFL either. But it just has a feel to me that basically when I look at this situation and I see what's going on, everything was okay 1 minute, and then he got hurt and he couldn't play anymore, and all of a sudden everything wasn't okay. Vince Young to me right now just sounds like somebody who's very bitter, somebody who's willing to blame everybody else but himself, and somebody who looks around and goes, society is dumping on me, and that's the reason why I'm out. That's why I'm not in the NFL. He blamed his financial troubles. He was willing to take responsibility 1 minute, and the next, he would just threw caution in the wind and said, nope, sorry, dude. It's not my fault. Not my problem. All after his hamstring injury. He has gone so far as to call Jeff Fisher envious and jealous of Vince Young. What's he jealous of? What's he got to be envious of? What, because maybe Jeff Fisher wasn't quite the athlete that you are? So? Does anybody remember Jeff Fisher coaching a guy named Steve McNair, the late, great Steve McNair? Does anybody remember that? All the guys that talked about the phenomenal relationship that those two had? That McNair was proud to be coached by Jeff Fisher? Look, I'm not stating that Jeff Fisher is the greatest coach of all time. That's not what I'm getting at. And I'm not saying that Jeff Fisher is not without fault. After all, Vince Young did say here's a story that Vince Young tells. Vince Young tells a story of running late to the airport. He says he forgot his driver's license. He had to run back to get it. He says on the way back, he got behind a funeral that was going on. And so obviously, out of respect, you have to let the funeral pass. And then he says that when he got there, he was just left there standing, claims that Fisher was laughing at him, and they got on the plane and they rolled without him because he says he was 2 minutes late. But if you go back, and I'll allow you to do the research on this, if you look at the track record of Jeff Fisher and his history of discipline, it's all pretty much the same across the board. While I don't believe that Jeff Fisher is without sin in this situation, I don't think that Vince Young is taking his share of the responsibility anymore because he's bitter. It just sounds like somebody who's all mad and upset that their career in football is completely over. I really feel like Vince Young should maybe take a step back for a little bit and begin to reevaluate the situation. I would be more on the side of Vince Young if I hadn't seen those Sports Illustrated interviews. Yes, he did call it a love-hate, but he also said that everything was okay and that he wasn't bitter. Now his career is officially done. He's 34 years old. There's really no going back. And now all of a sudden he's going to expose Jeff Fisher. And I will say this, for anybody who wants to knock Vince Young on how he did on his test and supposedly not being able to get his name spelled right and all that kind of stuff, that's not going to happen on this show. Because when guys get nervous, sometimes you just do little things that you just kind of miss out on. I'm not that guy. I'm not the one to judge. These are the facts that have been presented to me. And the facts is that Vince Young had a fairly good rookie season for a quarterback. And his second year, he dropped dramatically. His third year and his fourth year, he played hurt a lot of the time. He wasn't able to play a lot of the time as a result. Matter of fact, I think it was his third or fourth year. He only played one game due to injury. The Packers cut him. The Eagles ended up getting rid of him. He said everything was all right with him and Jeff Fisher. And then he gets hurt, and then he recants it all and says, you know what, I'm going to expose Jeff Fisher. If you have a difference of opinion, I'm more than willing to entertain it. I really am. But don't come at me with calling this guy names and saying, well, couldn't even spell his name right, this and that and a third. I'm not going to hear it. Because if Vince Young wasn't a great athlete, he wouldn't have been able to carry Texas the way that he did. I know a lot of people are going to talk about Lyman Sweed and all this, but where were those guys at in the NFL? The very real reality of it is without Vince Young, they wouldn't have won a national title that year. And I think that we all can admit to that. I remember one game in particular where they played against Oklahoma State, and I think they were down 28-0 or 28-3, somewhere in that neighborhood at halftime. And I think it was third or fourth down, and Vince Young goes back to pass. I'm talking like 3rd and 25. And he goes back to pass, and there was nobody open. He takes off, makes a hell of a run, and scores a touchdown. You see, the idea that an athlete is a moron, to me, is ridiculous in the first place. Because they're smart in different ways. They understand how to use their bodies. Gronkowski is a perfect example of somebody who understands how to use his body. The balance of a ballerina, hands softer than the silkiest, smoothest sheets you've ever put your hands on, the force of a wrecking ball, and the field presence and awareness of a fox on the hunt. Vince Young, I think, knew how to use his body, and I think had difficulty reading the defense, but every quarterback does in their first few seasons. Whether or not Vince Young would have been great, to be honest with you, I'm 50-50 on. What I know is this. I don't appreciate where he's coming from right now, because based off of these facts that have been presented, when he's once said that everything was okay, and then after he got hurt and couldn't play anymore, says, I'm going to expose somebody. To me, that's somebody who's desperate, bitter, and needs to sell a book.
You've been listening to the official Full Court Press podcast, hosted by myself, Drew Duncan. Don't forget, you can always find me on Twitter. That's at DrewDuncan83. Of course, the official Full Court Press podcast is on Facebook. You can also reach me there at DrewDuncan83 as well. For all you Instagrammers, I am on there at DrewDuncan83. Thank you so much for tuning in.